Ogunimin Samvazgano, Namik Monica Gidik, the Johns Hopkins Size, Ik Sorgoling Oyutan, Masjid Baitla. Hello all, and welcome to this joint seminar on the Biden administration's strategy in Northeast Asia, held by the Mongolian Institute of Northeast Asian Security and Strategy, the National University of Mongolia, and Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. My name is Monica Weller. I'm a current graduate student at Johns Hopkins SAIS, and I will be the moderator for today's event. We have 6 wonderful students who will each be presenting on a facet of the future of American foreign policy in relation to Northeast Asia. First, Mrs. Nargol Galt and Mrs. Ava Shen will both be presenting on economic relations. Then Ms. Baska Inkbat and Mr. Zian He will present on security policy in Northeast Asia, with a short break in between Baska and Zian's presentations. Our last 2 speakers, Ms. Momin Batoyag and Mr. William Chu, will present on cultural aspects of American foreign policy in Northeast Asia. We will then host a Q&A session among all of the participants and welcome questions from the audience. And also, hopefully there will be time at the end of each student's presentation if there are specific questions. In opening, I'd like to touch upon the U.S. relationship with Mongolia and the larger framework of U.S. foreign policy in Northeast Asia. So the U.S. officially established diplomatic relations with Mongolia in 1987, and Mongolia itself has been a democratic state for just over 30 years now. The United States has remained one of Mongolia's 3rd neighbors, alongside countries like Japan and South Korea, since the diplomatic strategy was first crafted. This has resulted in a strong cultural connection between the 2 countries, which includes extensive citizen exchanges through programs such as Peace Corps and the Fulbright program, through which I spent a year in Mongolia. There's a vibrant Mongolian American community throughout the United States, one of the most notable being in Washington, D.C. Through these connections, there continues to be strong person-to-person bonds between these 2 countries. Regarding the potential Mongolian connections under the Biden administration, in 2011, Joe Biden made the first visit to Mongolia as a sitting vice president to Mongolia from the US since 1944. So more so than most other US political figures, President Joe Biden has an awareness of Mongolia and its essential role as a strategic partnership with the United States. Various security reports, including those from the US Department of Defense, have emphasized Mongolia as a reliable, capable, and natural partner of the United States. Despite the ongoing global pandemic, Mongolian-US relations have continued to remain strong, with the first direct transcontinental flight from Mongolia to the United States, which brought PPE equipment to the United States to support the Navajo Nation in, I want to say, June 2020. So even as of March 2021, a resolution was passed in the US Senate reaffirming the strategic partnership between the United States and Mongolia and recognizing the 30th anniversary of democracy in Mongolia. So in the larger global framework, coming out of the shaky bilateral relations pursued by the US in regards to diplomatic relations in Northeast Asia, the Biden administration is likely to take a more multilateral tone once again, similar to that pursued by Barack Obama under the Pivot to Asia campaigns. However, the security and diplomatic situation facing the Biden administration is a much more uncertain future. While South Korea and Japan remain stalwart allies with the United States, their own bilateral relations are worse off. North Korea remains a volatile unknown in securing the safety of Northeast Asia, and China continues to grow economically, militarily, and politically. While there is still space for US cooperation with China, and it is essential to the stability of the region that this is found and pursued, American and Chinese strategists are increasingly running into conflicting ideals and policies, and thus the political framework in Northeast Asia grows increasingly complex. So therefore, it is vital that future policymakers and youth engage in the rapidly evolving roles of the United States, China, and Mongolia in Northeast Asia. I look forward to the variety of presentations covering the topic today, and hope that you take away new insights on the future of the Biden administration's strategy in Northeast Asia. Before I begin, I'd like to thank MINASS Center Director, Mr. Dorjsun Nanjin, for helping me to make today's event possible and for his efforts in furthering US Mongolian policy outreach. I first met him at Johns Hopkins Reischauer Center for East Asian Studies while I was researching Mongolian political affairs. So the involvement of researchers and those interested in continuing coordination between Mongolia and the United States is vital to the future of US-Mongolia diplomacy. And I'm very grateful for the presence of all those here today who are continuing that legacy. So without further ado, let me present our first speaker, Ms. Nargol Galt. And so Ms. Nargol's presentation is on the green economy, the next stop of US-China economic competition. She is a third-year student at the National University of Mongolia studying British Studies and Economics.
Okay, let me share my screen. Wait up. Okay. Okay. Can you see this? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, hello, good morning, and also good evening. And first of all, I would like to thank everyone here for gathering here today. And my name is Nargil, and the topic I will discuss today is the next step of US-China economic competition, the green economy. So before I start, I would like to briefly mention what exactly do I want to convey through this presentation. And there are three questions I would like to answer at the end of this presentation. And these are, why is the green economy the new frontier of the economic battle between the big two, China and US? And which one wins in the long run, and how? And how will this affect the world economy, and what does it mean for us? Okay, so as we all know, global economic growth is measured by GDP, the gross domestic product. And here we can see this trend of the GDP over time. And it has been expanding like a balloon in the in last 100 years or so. And the world economy is growing, and we're all supposed to be happy, right? But that's where the problem arises. The gross domestic product is the total monetary or market value of all the finished goods and services that are produced. That means we need to keep producing goods and services over and over again in order to function this whole growth, GDP growth. But and in order to keep this producing, we need natural resources, which is limited. So this has started this advocate for new means of generating wealth without pursuing economic growth. And here is one example of that, Kate Roberts' donut economics. And this is just this is the economic model that shows that we need new model of in our current and the current, according to Kate Robert, the current global economy has already failed. That's why we need a new economic thinking, economic model. And this model emphasizes and on balance between socio-ecological systems and highlights the importance of serving one without excessively damaging the other, remaining within the same and just space for humanity. And a lot of countries actually implemented this model in practice, such as China, South Africa, and UK. And let me emphasize it again, and this is just one example of this, whole changing perspective in economics. And yeah. And so here we can see the result of the research on the global green economic growths that were conducted by the FTSE Russell. And it shows that green economy has been growing not just as a concept, but in practice, in real life. As you can see from this first graphic, it has been growing and has peaked in 2017. And at the second pie chart, it shows that the US and China represent the two largest two largest areas of the market in line with the size of the global equity market today. And the third pie chart, the last one, shows that the energy management and efficiency sector is it represents the largest one in in terms of all of the sectors of 33% of the green economy. And it shows that why this green economy is, all of the trending in real life. And so following the new era, new markets are emerging. The green markets are emerging, and such as, there are many industries. Are prospering on this green economy, this green market, obviously. But due to the shortage of time, I would just mention just one example of that industries. This one is electric vehicles market, and according to the research conducted by Canalys, 3.1 million electric vehicles were sold in 2020, which is 4.7% of the new passenger cars. Electric vehicle sales will continue to rise, reaching 48% of passenger car sales by 2030. Huge number it is, right? And this enormous full market with full of bright future, China represents, makes up about over the half of the total market share. And this is the result and the effect of all of those stimulus measures, investments and tax incentives, tax exemptions that were implemented by the businesses and the government of China. And it shows that Chinese government is putting a lot of effort and importance on this whole issue of becoming a green economy. And on the other side, the US is seeing the changes too. President Joe Biden has been sending early signals that action on climate change will be front and center to his administration's agenda, and that his climate policy will be intertwined with his economic plan. And so the first thing he did after he became a president was rejoining the Paris Agreement. And also, he pledged to achieve net zero emissions economy-wide by 2050. And more recently, he has invited 40 world leaders, including Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, to the Leaders Summit on Climate he will host on this month. And according to this, all of this, based on this, his interviews and his campaign, his plans, we can see that he is planning to kill two birds with one stone, which means that he will shift his focus on the country's focus to this whole climate change issue. At the same time of getting the economy, US economy back on its feet. He even said that when he thought about the climate change, the word he thought about was jobs in one of his campaign. And here we can see the key elements of the Biden plan to build a modern, sustainable infrastructure and build an equitable and clean energy in the future, including these 7 key elements. And from here, you can see that at this 7th element, is the securing environmental justice and equitable economy opportunity. And this shows, this is maybe the most critical point of this whole key elements I see. Yeah. And on the other side, there is China, which in last year is giving a lot of importance and emphasis on this whole climate change and environmental issues. And they even announced that the famous Belt and Road Initiative will be focusing on being the green one. And in September 2020, for the first time, they've put forward the goal of achieving carbon neutrality before 2060 and peaking carbon dioxide emissions before 2030. And it was such a the important announcement. And what really makes this Belt and Road Initiative such an important a project is because the reason is this mega project covers a vast area stretching across 3 continents and involving some 78 countries. Together, these countries represent approximately 40% of the Earth's total land area and 30% of global GDP and 55% of total carbon dioxide emissions and 60% of world's total population. And that means the decision the implementations this Belt and Road and initiative will make will have an impact on in terms of the world. It will be really, that's why this is so important this project. And so here we can see this Belt and Road Initiative International Green Development Coalition, which was established in April 2019. And this is the international network which ensures that the Belt and Road brings along terms green and sustainable development to all concerned countries in support of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And these are the 10 thematic partnerships it focuses on. So as you can see from here, the word green is the key word in here, and green energy, green finance, and green cities and green transformation. And so from this, we can pursue that this whole goal of making the sectors green is the goal of Belt and Road Initiative. It is one of the goal of the Belt and Road Initiative, and more specifically, China's too. And so far, more than 110 countries have committed to becoming carbon neutral before 2050. And this means that the green, sustainable, and low carbon competition will become the main keynote for the third decade of the 21st century. And in this competition, there are 2 sides. On the other side, there is this China-centered orbit, and on the other side, there is G7-centered orbit, which is headed by the US. And if you were talking about like 20 years ago, the word competition wouldn't even be mentioned in this conversation because the China was not even close to the US level of this in this whole issue of climate change and green economics. But today is a different matter. And China's sharp increase in this expenditure for research and development, which is closely linked to the green market and innovation, is just one part of the country's decision to become, giving this a lot of importance and emphasis on this green market and also to dominate this green market sector. So that makes me come to this conclusion. climate change is an undeniable topic, and it is clear that it will be a major economic and political issue for decades to come. Therefore, that's why in a world where sustainable development and environmentally friendly technologies and products are becoming more and more important, a country or a company or even an individual who sees deeper opportunities to dominate the world's green markets and come up with modern solutions to environmental problems has the big advantage of becoming the world's next largest economy. So due to Trump's skepticism of climate change, the United States has lost a lot of time supposed to be spent on developing its green economy, while China attaches great importance to this sector and is rapidly approaching the United States at many levels of this whole green markets sector. But what's the Biden administration taking the power, which has promised to prioritize climate change, the United States has returned to this climate change frontier. And Joe Biden has already begun his work in the field of green economics. And at last, there are many kinds of competitions, like, unhealthy competitions, healthy competitions. But I see this whole competition for a green market is as a healthy competition to drive down the cost of clean technologies and reduce emissions would be to the world's benefit. It will be, I think, win-win in the long run. And yeah. And these are the references I have used. And thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Okay. So since we're running a little bit, thank you so much for your presentation, Naraka. That was wonderful. Since we're running a little late on time, we'll probably move on to the next presentation. But if anyone, unless anyone has a question to ask now, if someone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask the question. Otherwise, please feel free to put it into the chat and we'll come back to it at a later time in the presentation. So I'll wait a moment. And if nothing else, then I'll go ahead and move on to our next speaker, Ms. Ava Shen, who is a first year's master's degree student concentrating in China studies at Johns Hopkins SAIS. So her presentation is on US-China economic relations, Trump legacies and Biden opportunities. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Monica. And thank you, Nargil, for your presentation. And let me share my screen. Okay. Play from start. All right. Okay, great. Thank you everyone for being here. And so as Monica said, my presentation is going to be about US-China economic relations, and I will lean toward trade relations a little bit. And so first we'll go through sort of what Trump did during his administration, and then also we'll go through recent events which have taken place under the Biden administration, and also some opportunities and outlooks for the US-China economic relations under Biden. Oops. All right. Okay, so Trump, under the Trump administration, I summarized his approach to US economic relations in 4 words. So confrontational, unilateral, inconsistent, and unpredictable. And so when I say those 4 words, I mean in the following different things. So first, we have a lot of unilateral tariffs and also the trade war, which have resulted in the phase 1 trade deal. But the outcomes were suboptimal because US exports were harmed in the process, and also China didn't really reach its purchasing targets promised in the deal. So this deal definitely has future potential. And the second manifestation of that is executive orders and entity lists targeting specific Chinese companies in terms of access to US markets and et cetera. And so executive orders have banned, have tried to ban TikTok and WeChat. And the entity list refers to a specific list under the US Department of Commerce that tries to restrict that restricts US exports access by Chinese companies. And in this list, there are a lot of Chinese companies, and mostly they're tech related or manufacturer related that involves super specific US exports that can be really important. And then also there are economic sanctions, which are related to human rights abuses that US condemns in terms of Chinese actions regarding to Hong Kong and also in Xinjiang region. Sorry. And okay, so next I will talk about sort of the institutions that Trump executed his policies through. And what I observed is that the executive branch has rising authority in terms of economic and trade policy. And so the US Trade Representative has been really involved in trade negotiations and also the formulation of the phase one trade deal. And also the US Department of Commerce, as I mentioned before, there is a specific bureau that's called the Bureau of Industry and Security. And they're in charge of this entity list that puts Chinese companies and restricts their access to US exports. And there is also the US Department of the Treasury. And under that, there is the Office of Foreign Asset Control and also the Committee for Investment in the United States. So those two are the first one is in charge of imposing and reinforcing US sanctions on Chinese officials and entities. And the second one is responsible in reviewing Chinese investments in the US and US companies. And those have been decreasing in recent years because of such review and because of the heating up of US-China competition. And the legislative is actually quite okay in terms of like supporting the executive in terms of executing such trade policies. And we are also seeing a bipartisan consensus in terms of this increasing levels of tension against China and also even opposition against China. The next one, okay, so now we move on to the Biden administration. So what I observed is that there has been a continued utilization of the key institutions that have rising powers under the Trump administration. A specific example of that is the USTR appointee, who is now confirmed. Her name is Catherine Tai, and she's the first Asian American woman to hold this position. And her background is Taiwanese American, and she has worked extensively with China, and she has a lot of experience with China. And so this appointment can confirm, Biden's focus on China in terms of trade. And so she's going to be very influential, I believe, in future trade negotiations with China, if there are going to be any, which I think there will. And the second point related to the USTR is that Tai has announced that the existent tariffs imposed by the Trump administration will remain, and there will be a review conducted in terms of the trade policies under Trump toward China. And there have been also an expansion of including more Chinese companies on the entity list as related to the Bureau of Investment and Security. So there, I think it was a few days ago. I don't remember which day it was, but there were 7 Chinese companies that were related to supercomputers that the U.S. has, information in terms of them supporting the PLA in terms of developing military technologies. So they want to restrict these companies' access to U.S. export and technology. And there have been also more economic sanctions on the part of the U.S. government. But those sanctions are different in terms of Trump's approach. As Monica mentioned in her opening speech, that there has been sort of this coalition building going on, this multilateral approach. And so there have been more sanctions against Hong Kong officials and also against the ongoing situation in Xinjiang. And in that instance, there have been similar sanctions imposed by Canada and the UK and the EU. Okay, so in this last minute, I'll just wrap up in terms of the outlook. I think there is I think the trend of securing US supply chains will continue, and there will be more sort of efforts to restrict Chinese company access to US tech. And another possibility I see is that there could be a continuation or a renewal of the comprehensive economic dialogue, which is a bilateral economic conversation between the two governments to figure out how this relationship is going to be. So I would imagine that the Biden administration might be working towards that. And I think the Chinese government would be willing to participate in that. And also I see a possibility for the Biden administration to push for Chinese structural reforms in their economy. Some of those are mentioned in the phase 1 trade deal in terms of intellectual property enforcement and things like that. And so if there's going to be negotiations for the phase 2 trade deal, and the tariffs can be used potentially as a leverage for Chinese reform concessions, if that's possible. And another way is for the US to rejoin the CPTPP agreement, which the US exited under the Trump administration. So now it's been led by Japan. So if the US can rejoin this Trans-Pacific economic partnership, then if China is considering to join, then that way the Chinese part will have to undergo necessary reforms before they can actually join. So that can also achieve the objective of pushing for Chinese structural reforms in their economy. And so I guess another question. So what will be sort of the implications for Mongolia under this context of US-China economic competition? Since I'm not a Mongolian expert at all, so I leave this question to the audience, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Ava. That was great. It's really interesting to learn about kind of sanctions and how you think that the future of kind of international trade agreements and free trade will be going forward. So we'll have, if there's no questions now, please feel free to direct it to all of the audience or to Ava specifically if you have any questions. And otherwise, I'll be asking this speaker some questions at the very end of this session. If there's no questions for now, then I will move on to our next presenter, who is Ms. Baska Enkpat, who will be presenting on US security policy related to trade wars, cyber, and internal security issues. She is a fourth-year undergraduate student at the National University of Mongolia, majoring in international relations. So, okay, Baska, go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm very glad to see and hear you guys. My name is Basan Jargas, and my topic is US security policy. And but today I'm going to talk about these three subtopics: that trade war, cybersecurity, and domestic or internal security. So first of all, it would be right to talk about a little about US-China relations. Just a little bit. So during the Obama's administration, China was one of the main countries for the U.S. foreign policy, but United States always had a trade deficit between the United States and China trade. The U.S. In the U.S. presidential election 2017, Donald Trump was elected the next president of the United States, and after he was elected as president, he changed Obama's administration's policies and tightened them. And he frayed ties with traditional U.S. allies with its America First approach, and he began his presidencies by investigating unfair trade practice in China. On July 6, 2018, the United States officially announced the 25% tariff on 818 items worth $34 billion imported from China. Following this announcement, China imposed the same 25% tariff on agricultural products, cars, and seafoods imported from the United States. Thus, the two countries started the trade war, and it's still ongoing. Okay, so now the next US presidential election 2020, Joe Biden won and was elected the next president of US. Many people thought Biden would continue Obama's administration of policy, and of course, in some areas, his administration similar as Obama's administration. But for the trade war, I think he is likely to continue Trump's policy. Perhaps he has expressed the wish to discuss U.S.-China trade issues with its allies first. It is critical that they do this immediately so that relations between the United States and China can be repaired. And he expressed to take steps to restore America's standing in the world, to recommitting to its alliances and partnerships. The United States will again embrace international cooperation toward a better, safer, and more resilient, more prosperous world. So, also, he is trade representative, secretary of state, and security advisor have the same thought with him. You can see from this slide these officials what they said and about what they said on China, and I think one of the as I mentioned before, one of the Biden's administration priorities is to restore American global standing. It's unlikely that the United States will rush to end the trade war as compromise, or an early end to the trade war could damage America's reputation and cause significant economic losses. So as a result of this topic, in my opinion, if a war breaks out, it will end, of course, but when the US-China trade war will end remains as an interesting question. Of course, one day it will end, but not today, but not tomorrow, and just one day maybe that day comes soon, I hope. So let's talk about the next subtopic, that's cybersecurity. In this age of ever-evolving technology, cybersecurity cannot overlook it or ignore it. The fact that entire sectoral government operations and services has gone digital is a direct indication of the need to pay attention to cybersecurity. Cyberspace and its underlying infrastructure are vulnerable to a wide range of risks stemming from both physical or cyber threats and hazards. Sophisticated cyber actors and nation states exploit vulnerabilities to steal information and money, and are developing capabilities to disrupt and destroy or threaten the delivery essential services. Cyberspace is particularly difficult to secure due to following a number of factors you can see from this slide. And as information technology becomes increasingly integrated with physical infrastructure operations, there is increased risk for wide-scale or high-consequence events that could cause harm or disrupt service upon which its economy and the daily lives of millions of Americans depend. In light of the risk and potential consequence of cyber events, strengthening the security and resilience of cyberspace has become an important homeland security missions. So in the United States, there is several cybersecurity agencies, centers, and organizations. One of them is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It builds the nation's capacity to defend against cyber attacks and works with the federal government to provide cybersecurity tools, incident response services, and assessment capabilities to safeguard the .go networks that support essential operations of partner departments and agencies. So, according to this, according to the CISA, the current cyber threats in the United States come from China and Russia and North Korea. So, I think America is cares a lot about the cybersecurity, and it works well enough, I think. So let's talk about the last subtopic, that U.S. domestic or internal security. When we talk about internal security, we need to consider many issues such as immigrations and racial equity and COVID-19, etc. We know that there have been many civil demonstrations and movements in the United States over the past year, including Black Lives Matter demonstration against the pandemic lockdown and demonstration against the result of presidential elections, etc. So many, I think. Many protests and riots caused the chaos among the people and greatly damaged the reputation of the United States. As a country, US as a country that respects human rights and seeks to spread the democratic values, it's the time to focus on domestic security and policy in the face of these many human rights abuse at home. The promises of its nation is that every American has an equal chance to get ahead, and President Biden is putting equity at the center of the agenda with the whole of government approach to aim at racial justice across federal agencies, policies, and programs. First and foremost, it was timely for the Biden administration to prioritize racial equity and immigration. He expressed the South approach to immigration and will reform its strong, broken, and chaotic immigration system. So now about the COVID-19, he also plans to implement a policy to protect his people from the COVID-19 pandemic. President Biden will move quickly to contain the COVID-19 crisis by expanding testing, safely reopening schools and businesses, and taking science-driven steps to address the communities. And he will launch a national vaccination program to inoculate the US population efficiently and equitably. Okay, in the end of my presentation, I have three conclusions. So the firstly, one of the Biden's administration priorities is restoring America's global standing. Therefore, it's unlikely that the US will rush to end the trade wars compromises or an early end to trade war could damage American reputation and significant economic losses. And for cybersecurity, the cybersecurity is one of the most important sectors for state nation security, and the United States government is paying close attention to its cybersecurity. It works well enough, I think. And the last one is for about the domestic security. America's national security policy strives to strengthen homeland security, security while also promoting domestic and global peace. So here are the main references, and thank you for attention. If you have any questions or any comments, I can try to answer your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Vasca, for that wonderful and very informative presentation. It's very good to kind of see that it is important for the U.S. to focus on more regional issues rather than kind of trying to overextend itself in foreign policy arenas. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat box. Otherwise, we'll be answering more questions at the end of the session, allowing for time. And speaking of time, because we are running a little bit late, we'll be moving on to our next speaker, Mr. Zian He. So he is a second-year Japan Studies concentrator at Johns Hopkins, and he will be presenting on Mongolia's diplomacy under great power competition. So thank you, and I look forward to your presentation as well.
Great, thanks everyone. Let me put my presentation. Well, can everybody see my slides? Great, thanks. Well, hi everyone, I'm Zian, and thank you for this opportunity to presenting in this conference regarding the Mongolia's foreign policies. But the topic I'm presenting today is the Mongolians' diplomacies under great power competitions. And to begin with, please allow me to go through a little bit about the geography of the Mongolia. Mongolia is known as the second largest landlocked countries in the world, with a population of 337 million estimated in 2020. And Mongolia has two neighbors. One is Russia and another is China. Mongolia shares the borders with Russia about 3,452 kilometers, and share the border with China is 4,677 kilometers, which makes, I believe, the geography of Mongolia will lead to two major diplomatic challenges for this country. The first one is, of course, the geographic positions, the landlocked, which limited the economic independence from China and Russia. Given the Mongolia have no direct accessibility to a sealions, it makes it much more challenging for the Mongolia to seeking for international trade and international cooperation without cooperating with these two countries, which the previous Mongolian government, previous Mongolian presidents described this kind of geographic position as a pony between the two giant elephants. And the second one is the limited alternatives. Well, although the Mongolia do have the partnership with the United States, but also because of the geographic positions, it has a very relatively low strategic priority to the United States. And to deal with those problems, some scholars suggest there are three options. The first, bandwagoning upon one of the elephants, the buffering nations, China or Russia. And second is rely on the third powers, which is also the third neighbor strategy, which many of our presenters already mentioned in the previous session. And the third one is maintaining the institutionalized neutrality. And for me, I believe all three combined will be the best strategy for the Mongolia's foreign policies in the new era. Well, and the question is, what can be the channels for the Mongolians to access to its utilize its foreign policies, diplomacy's influence, and just like and also I believe that in the economy and diplomacies, they all have strong connections with each other. As you may know, that Mongolia suffered from one of the worst air quality scores in the world, with low quality, the air quality index showing that there is Mongolia's air quality suffering from the coal-fired energy sectors, because the highly reliance on the coal-fired energy sectors to produce energy for example, electricity. Also, is included destroyed of grassland due to its excessive exporting of the cashmere wool, and that's the Mongolian government already starting to realize those issues, and the state policy on energy from 2015 to 2030 starting the initiative of a share of renewable energy in total installed capacity of 20% and 30% in terms of 2023 and 2030. The first option is bandwagoning, as I mentioned here, is China as an example. There are a few opportunities from this. We'll take advantage of the BRI Belt and Road Initiative from China, which could help the Mongolian to identify the Mongolian's economy, to diversify Mongolian's economies and developing industrial sectors beyond the current agriculture and the natural mining sectors. Also take advantage of China's rapidly rising economic powers and growth. Like currently, more than 5,000 Mongolian firms are operating in China, and Mongolia has donated, and also will connect you to the COVID-19's very recent issues. Mongolia has donated 30,000 ships to China supporting the COVID-19 controls in China, and in return, China returned 300,000 doses, and in turn, the Mongolia becomes one of the first receivers of China's COVID-19 vaccines. And the next part is the disadvantage and challenges. One of the few things that many Western scholars concern is the Belt and Road BRI identifies on one of it has the tendency to indebt the developing countries and the loan receivers. As you may see here, the Mongolia is one of the potential victims from the debt trap. And also, it's worth to mention that Mongolia has historically suffered from the Soviet debt during the Cold War. So as a result, the Mongolian government should be very cautiously involved in the cooperation with China, given the historical perspectives. And also another thing was to mention that China's investment is really oriented to the natural resources. 89% of the Mongolian exports went to China, but two out of the 2.5 billion Chinese FDI to Mongolia, there is 1.4 billion were targeting on natural resources. And besides, we talk since today we are discussing about talking about United States. Of course, the second options which we will highlight here is the rely on the third powers, and here we highlight the United States and Japan. The climate change, as some of our presenters already mentioned, climate change and environmental protection is critical for the new Biden administration. And Mongolia due to the Mongolians' assertiveness in dealing with environmental challenges currently happen in the Mongolia. Mongolia can become the critical contributor against climate change to increase. Although it will also help Mongolia to increase its exposure internationally and strengthening its value recognitions, sharing with United States. Also, Mongolia is traditional steadfast contributor to the US and the NATO military cooperations as well. Well, the next part on Japan, well, since I don't have a lot of time to go through this, I will just be quick. Mongolia has a large potential to develop in the renewable energy sectors. Well, one of the reasons is currently coal-dependent energy responsible for two-thirds of the Mongolia's greenhouse emissions. And also the ADB, the Asian Development Bank from Japan, now is investing the world's largest battery energy storage system in Mongolia as well. And the third option is the maintaining the institutional neutralize, which Mongolia has been long practiced in the past. Mongolia is the strategic partners with both the US and China. And also they are practicing the continued energy growth strategy as the dominant strategy, keeping the investments of any foreign countries lower than 1/3 of the total share. And in the conclusions, there are 4 points I would like to make. The first is avoiding direct participating in geopolitics. For example, making controversial comments on international affairs, giving its share borrowing with China, and Russia make it extremely hard for them to it's extremely hard for Mongolia to participate in geopolitics. Also, of course, remaining neutrality between the U.S.-China competitions, and also being proactively participating in geopolitical initiatives, for example, environmental protection, climate change, promoting human rights and the liberal values as well, seeking cooperation opportunities with any countries which may benefit the Mongolia's development, but never forget that encouraging foreign investment, but we have to particularly on sustainable, focus on the sustainable development instead of the low quality and the non-sustainable development, and also under the market competitions, setting the higher standard for FDI and balance the external influence. All right, I think that's all for my presentation today. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Well, thank you for your time, Zian. I think it's important that people that are not Mongolian also understand that Mongolia has a very complex and interesting framework. So I'm very excited that you were able to present on that. And so we could all learn a little bit more about that topic. And so next we'll be moving on to our final discussion topic, cultural policy. And so our first speaker on cultural policy will be Ms. Nomin Patuyag. So she will be presenting on the Biden administration's policy towards international students and hate crimes against Asians in the United States. She is a third-year student in the international law program at the National University of Mongolia. Well, Nomin, I'll give it away to you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Do you guys see my presentation? Okay. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Nemin, and today I will talk about Biden's cultural policy, but I will focus on two main points. And the first one is how much international students contribute to U.S. economy and Biden's administration towards them. And the second one is Asian hate crimes, one of the serious issue that's happening in U.S. right now, and the measures Biden's administration taking against them. The United States has been a study destination for a very long time, and the international students contribute billions of dollars to U.S. economy, with a large portion of that coming from tuition fees and also living expenses. And the Association of International Educators announced data that shows international students contribute nearly $41 billion to U.S. economy and also supported many jobs during 2018-2019 academic year. The the reason is that these students typically pay higher tuition than domestic students, and making many American universities reliant on the revenue stream. Most of the international students come from India and China. In this slide, I choose the example of students from China and also South Korea. Over half of the international students in US have pursued majors in STEAM fields, which is science, technology, and engineering and mathematics. Under the Trump administration, Trump administration made it hard for international students to study in USA. The reason is that, for example, declining students enrollment in US and limiting postgraduate work opportunities. Because of that, in 2019-2020, the total number of enrollment international students, newly arrived students, as well as those already studying in US, dropped for the first time since 2005. And the important thing is that what can Biden do about this issue? And Biden stated that the education is one of the urgent priorities for the 100 days, and the administration also expressed the commitment to modernizing the national immigration system in ways that respond to economic needs and also prevent US from losing talent to other nations. And also Biden has proposed to make it easier for international students, which with advanced degrees in STEAM fields, which I mentioned earlier, over half of the international students, to receive work visas and apply for permanent residency. But however, how much Biden can reform the system remains to be seen. Even so, international applicants to US college for the fall semester are already 9% up from last year. And this implies a renewed interest in studying in US. Now I will move on to COVID hate crimes that is happening in US right now. And in March 2020, the tweet by former President Trump that referred to COVID-19 as the Chinese virus led Asian hashtags on the platform to rise precipitously. And most of the people think that the tweet by Trump weaponized the Asian hate. And also the FBI warned at the start of the COVID outbreak in the US that it's expected to surge the hate crimes against those Asians. And here you can see a graphic that shows in 16 of American largest cities, the incidents that happened are increased in 145% in 2020, and this is a huge number, right? And also the advocacy group Stop AAP stands for Asian American Pacific Islander hate, received more than 2,900 reports on the hate incidents that directed as Asian American nationwide last year. Now we all think that what is Biden's position to combat these incidents, these crimes? That Biden stated that we can't be silent in the face of rising violence against Asian Americans, and also said, my administration condemns and denounces acts of racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against AAP communities. As you can see, there are some of the main regulations that prove that we all have equal rights and protection of the law. And the first one is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. According to Article 7, all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. And second one is also a U.S., of course, the U.S. Constitution. In U.S. Constitution Amendment 14 stated that no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction to equal protection of the law. And also American Convention on Human Rights, Article 24, that all persons are equal before the law. Consequently, they are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. We can conclude that everyone has a equal rights before the law, and so the next one is we will talk about what measures is the Biden administration taking to combat these incidents and these crimes. On March 13, 2021, President Joe Biden signed an executive order aimed at combating racism, xenophobia, and violence against the AAPI community. And there are some measures that Biden's administration is taking. The first one is to establish the White House Initiative on Asian American and Pacific Islanders with an initial emphasis of ending Asian American bias and violence, and also increase funding on AAPI survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and establish a task force to address coronavirus-fueled xenophobia against Asian Americans, and establish a cross-agency justice department to investigate anti-Asian violence. And they're also launching a new bookshelf that celebrate Asian American contribution to the United States, and also funding National Science Foundation research on discrimination. And also the President Biden urged the Senate to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which is introduced on March 23rd, 2021, but it is not the law. It's still in consideration, but the purpose of this bill is to facilitate the expedited view on COVID-19 hate crimes. And at the end of this presentation, I made two conclusions, and the first one is for the international students and Biden's policy towards them. Biden's policy, the presidency of Joe Biden is a silver lining for international students, and also as for Asian hate crimes, and U.S. has an adequate legal framework in place, and also Biden's administration is taking effective measures against the Asian hate crimes. And these are the references that I use. And thank you so much. Feel free to ask questions.
Well, thank you so much, Nomi. That was, it's a really unfortunate thing that's happening. And I think that it's good that the US is taking these kinds of measures, but it's hard to know what will be effective. And it's really vital that we can get hate crimes down regardless of who they're against going into the future. So if no one has questions at the moment, please feel free to put them into the chat. Our next speaker and final speaker will be Mr. William Chu, who will present on the US-China rivalry in the field of educational and cultural exchanges. So he is a first-year China Studies concentrator at Johns Hopkins sites. So I'll let you take it from here. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Everyone hear me okay? Great. So first of all, I just want to say thank you very much to all the wonderful presentations before me. I particularly appreciate hearing about the issue of that Asian Americans are facing in the United States. As an Asian American myself, I can say that it's been a tough time. So I deeply appreciate it. So I think the last presentation was really complimentary, and I think will build off of what I'm going to talk about next very well. So today I'm going to hopefully give a short presentation and talk to everybody about how the growing US-China rivalry is going to be affecting the cultural and educational exchanges that are happening between the two countries. So to begin, I want to give a bit of foundation. The Biden administration has been described by many in the United States as a sort of return to internationalism. It's very much unlike the Trump administration. President Biden has made it very clear that the United States will return to its place as sort of a leader of an international rules-based system. And reading this little statement from the White House, you can see dramatically how different that tone is in terms of potential for international cooperation, unlike the more transactional nature of the Trump presidency. And furthermore, even though the US-China relationship has continued to really trend towards rivalry, the Biden administration has been careful, I would say, to construct and structure its rhetoric to leave room open for cooperation in important areas where it can happen. So this quote from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he said recently, I think sums up very well. Competitive where it should be, but also collaborative when it can be. So that really begs the question, is US-China cultural and educational engagement such an opportunity? It seems obvious that it should be, but as I'll come to argue, it's really actually not quite so simple, unfortunately. So I won't go too much into this because Noman had a really excellent presentation, but it's important to remind ourselves here that unlike previous relationships the United States has had with other rivals, such as the Soviet Union, the US and China has a very long and continuing history of person-to-person exchanges. And thousands and thousands of students travel between the two countries every year. And without a doubt, these ties have brought tremendous benefit to the two countries and have been tremendously important in helping the two countries understand each other. But despite continuing engagement, this exchange actually faces a huge number of domestic challenges within the United States. So to sort of illustrate that point, I'm going to run us through a couple of case studies. And before I start, though, I understand that I came here today to talk about the Biden administration's policies, but it's important to understand that as of right now, the most relevant policies in place are really still holdovers of the Trump administration, which significantly reduced the number of exchanges that was happening between the United States and China. And it's important to note that the Biden administration, as of today, has not yet reversed many of those decisions because, there's a lot of bureaucratic policy making that has to happen in order for those obstacles to be overcome. And finally, to some extent, it has been a growing bipartisan consensus in Washington to challenge China. And, these policies, this consensus lead me to believe that, to some extent, there really is a degree of continuity between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, regardless of the fact that the Biden administration has a much more humanist and internationalist outlook. So the first example I'd like to bring up here is that bilateral exchange programs between the United States and China has actually dramatically eroded in just the last year of the Trump administration. And it's going to be very difficult for the Biden administration to immediately set about bringing those back. So I want to just point out here of note is the Peace Corps U.S. Peace Corps program in China, which is traditionally, meant to, send young Americans to help provide valuable services to assist in the development of developing countries, as well as act as sort of U.S. cultural ambassadors. And also the Fulbright program, which, as many of you might be familiar with, has been very instrumental in providing scholarships for students to travel to different countries around the world, engage in language education, and build understanding. So in recent years, there's a great example here. U.S. Republican Senator Rick Scott has said of the Peace Corps program, there's no reason we should prop up our adversaries with U.S. tax dollars. And of the sort of 5 other exchange programs here, in the last year of the Trump administration, Senator Secretary of State Pompeo himself said that these programs were all in fact sort of soft propaganda tools for the Chinese Communist Party. So despite the fact that one would think that these sort of exchange programs are win-win and maybe non-controversial, the mood in the United States has been transforming very rapidly, and these programs are starting to be seen as threats rather than constructive opportunities. So the same story here also applies to Chinese foreign students in the United States. So I know this was touched on before, but the United States has actually in the recent years grown increasingly hostile and suspicious of Chinese foreign students. And this is in part due to the US understanding and framing of the issue. So the United States sees China's so-called civil military fusion policy, which essentially aims to link together the sort of capabilities of the civilian sector with the military sector, such that civilian advancements in military technologies can be used to aid in China's development of their own domestic military technologies. But what this has done is in essentially tying together the civilian realm with the military realm, the United States claims that this means it must sort of view all Chinese students in these fields as something of a threat. So you can see from these headlines, there's been some very controversial things said in the United States about it. The director of the FBI, he came under a lot of fire for saying this, but he framed it as China is a whole of society threat. Where every student coming over here could be a potential spy. So I'm sure I don't really need to explain this. This has been incredibly destructive and has created a really massive atmosphere of hostility for students. So even as the trend for international students in general has been improving under the Biden administration, it's important to note that this policy, just because the Biden administration has come into the office, these efforts have been ongoing under FBI and other defense agencies within the United States. So there's a sort of momentum here that it's difficult to say whether this is going to end just because President Biden is in office. Finally, the same story can also be applied to China's famous Confucius Institutes, which, for those of you who don't know, are centers for teaching Chinese language funded by the Chinese government. So in the United States, they've been accused of being they've been accused of bringing Chinese censorship to American university campuses at best, and at worst have been accused of being centers of Chinese like espionage and data collection. So, in response to this, Congress in fact passed the 2018 Defense Authorization Act that actually prohibited any Department of Defense scholarships for learning Chinese language at any university with a Confucius Institute. So, in 2017, there were 103 of these institutes. In 2021, there's only 50, and actually more are closing by the day. So my own understanding of this is actually that a lot of these concerns are really dramatically overplayed. I mean, it's really not the case at all that it's as bad as people have been saying, but in general, the political atmosphere in the United States has grown very hostile. So it's difficult to say whether the Biden administration can exactly reverse something like this, because the closure of so many centers can't very easily be undone by a single executive action. So this is a permanent and lasting effect on U.S.-China exchange. Finally, one issue which doesn't relate to the Biden administration, relate to the Biden administration, is the example of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics. So even though the Olympics are a classic symbolic opportunity for international cooperation, you'll see from these headlines that it has indeed transformed into another battleground for the US-China rivalry. Although the US government has not stated that they are considering an actual boycott of the game, you can tell the political atmosphere in the United States, there's a tremendous political pressure on the Biden administration to effect some kind of boycott on China in order to supposedly punish Beijing for its human rights violations in Xinjiang and Hong Kong and other areas. So this just sort of illustrates that even if we won't see an actual boycott, there's probably going to be a soft boycott. So despite the fact that the Biden administration is ostensibly more open to the idea of international cooperation, there are actually very few concrete opportunities for them to act on it without running into, the massive I guess, ghost hanging over everyone's heads that is the US-China rivalry. So to sort of summarize all my points here today, the cuts to educational and cultural exchange between China and the United States have been very much real, and they've done real damage for opportunities for engagement. Exchanges are important, and they're foundational to reducing tensions, building understanding, and they are essentially the cornerstones of international diplomacy. Yet I would argue that despite the fact that the Biden administration is more receptive to the idea of cooperation in select areas with China where they exist, finding those actual opportunities is going to be a lot harder than it looks, because intensifying rivalry with China and growing bipartisan consensus in Washington that China is an enemy, not a friend, means that what was once very harmless win-win opportunities for exchange are now increasingly being perceived, I would argue maybe somewhat wrongly, that they are all avenues of potential infiltration or will act as sort of propaganda tools for China. So it's going to be difficult to see how the Biden administration moving forward can act on this issue, because arguably there's a lot of headwinds that are going to keep them from acting in this direction. So in short, it's not really a good outlook for US-China exchanges, but it's still early in the Biden administration. And for those who are keen on watching this issue, I would advise you all to continue to wait and see how the Biden administration moves forward on this issue, because thus far, most of the policies have still been dictated by the Trump administration. And understandably, the mood in the United States right now isn't for the Biden administration to make overtures to China just yet. But I suspect in the months to come, such opportunities might still come up. So thank you, everybody. It was very much a pleasure for me to speak here and get to listen to everyone's presentations. If you have any questions at all, I'd be more than happy to speak on this issue, because as a Chinese American, US-China exchange is a topic that's quite dear to my heart. Thank you, everybody.
So I'd like to thank all of our speakers here today. I think they all had wonderful presentations. And again, just re-emphasizing kind of that there is kind of a serious constraint and an ongoing constraint on kind of cultural relations happening between the US and China. And if that continues, I mean, relations are only going to get worse if there is none of that people-to-people interaction going on into the future. So we are getting close to time. If the speakers are willing to stay and any guests would like to stay, then I'm happy to extend this for about 10 more minutes or so, if you'd like to, and stay and just kind of answer some questions. But if you need to go, then please feel free. We don't want to keep you over time. But again, thanks both to all of the speakers for putting together such wonderful presentations and donating their time and effort during a busy school semester to do this, as well as to all of the guests and listeners that came in to watch this presentation. So thank you all for coming, and I'll stay around, and I do have questions to ask the speakers. So if people want to stay around, then I'll be around and I'll be asking. So yeah, but thank you. Yeah, yay. So, okay, so let's start from the top. So to Nargil, do you think that the US will be able to catch up to Chinese efforts towards green energy?
So that is really a good question, I would say. Even though China is putting a lot of efforts in the field of green energy, it still has a long way to go because it almost started from the scratch in this field. So according to the research that was conducted by the Goldman Sachs, in order to become a carbon neutral country by 2060, China needs to increase its expenditure volume, and this country's the expenditure volume has to be over $16 trillion. And so it will be a big challenge for China's side. And for US, it has a strong foundation on this field. And considering the Biden administration taking this issue so seriously, it will not that long that to catch up to China's efforts towards green energy, I think. However, I think the US has already lost its dominance, the biggest dominance in the area of green economy, because for now there it has become, came the China in this scene. So yeah, I
No, that's a great answer. No, and I really appreciate it. So,
thank you.
no, I think it'll be really interesting. And I do think that it's important because China is such a big manufacturer that they continue kind of producing green energy, because I think it's better that countries produce green energy than like try to stop doing it because another country is doing something else. So yeah, I like that.
Thank you.
Okay, to follow up with that, so Ava, so do you think that further economic sanctions against China is actually a useful strategy, or do you think it'll further depress the global economy, regardless of it's bilateral or multilateral?
That's a very interesting question, Monica. I would say in terms of, I don't think the economic sanctions will have sort of like a global economic impact. I think that the sanctions right now are very much symbolic in terms of, the US government, the Canada government, and the UK and the EU saying that we're not okay with this. And then so there's a very, in terms of if you look at the Xinjiang related sanctions, they're very much limited to provincial level officials. So if you actually sanction central level, I think there is like one maybe that's like super senior, but all of them are like very individually based and trying to limit their travel and freezing their assets in the US. So it's not supposed to have like global economic impact. But in terms of like the efficacy of trying to change the course of Chinese action, call me a pessimist, but I think in terms of the Xinjiang and the ongoing situation, I don't think China is going to reverse it. Or even if there's an intention of backtrack at it won't be very explicit. It will definitely be sort of like behind the curtains and rolling it back. But certainly right now, I definitely don't see it rolling back in terms of that. And the same goes with Hong Kong as well. So yeah, but it's not very, very happy, but that's my take.
Okay, to follow up with that, moving on to Vasca. Do you think that the U.S. foreign policy should be should be weaker in the future so that they can focus on domestic issues rather than focusing on foreign policy in the future?
I think the American domestic security is U.S. faces the domestic some issues right now, and of course, in the future, U.S. care about the foreign policy, but today's time, at the moment, this moment should care more domestic security. I think, yeah. Foreign policy is always important, for all countries. Yeah. Thank you. That's an interesting question.
No, I definitely agree. But I think that as a bunch of foreign policy nerds, we're probably in the minority population that agrees with that. But thank you. That's a wonderful response. So moving on to Zian. So do you think that Mongolia's third neighbor strategy is viable in the future to kind of try and balance this neutrality between the US and China and other neighbors?
Well, I think it is applicable in a sense that, well, United States is also a part of the third neighbor strategy as well. It is included. And also, I think the other countries like South Korea, Japan, and can also be an important parts of the third neighbor strategies. But well, but on the other hand, we have to recognize there are some difficulties given that the Mongolia's geographic position is so special, unique, and which will lead to some of these difficulties. For example, how can those third parties have more accessibilities to the regions, given that the Mongolia itself doesn't have the sea lanes and they do not have direct involvement to the international economics, and they have to go through China or through Russia to get in touch with the other countries. So in that sense, the government should be very concerned what kind of cooperations they made with the third neighbors, because otherwise they may be facing some sanctions from China or sanctions from Russia, which can be very dangerous um, considering Mongolia's position. But I think if they can conduct a comprehensive plan and also maintaining it's not necessary to be a very friendly relation with the two countries, but if they can have a consistent constructive relations with the two countries, I think if that is possible, I think yes. So I think third neighbor strategy will be very productive in the future. Thanks.
And it looks like we have a question from the audience. So if that audience member would like to either say their question out loud or write it in the chat, I'm sure our speakers would be happy to answer. And it looks like you are muted. So if you would like to unmute yourself,
okay.
That's possible.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm not a student, and I'm Dr. Ren. I'm Director of Mongolian Institute of Strategic Studies. And thanks, Monica, for co-hosting today's workshop. And I have a question to Mr. Jiang. Actually, it was very interesting. You mentioned about the Mongolian policy, the big power games. And my question is, why does US include Mongolia in the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy? And from your perspective, how you see? Thank you.
I think it's a question to me, is it? Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you. I think it's a great question. I think from the US perspective, given the rising US-China tensions, the Mongolia have a more strategic importance comparing to the previous years. I think that might be one of the concerns. And also, I think another reason is, well, if well, feel free to disagree, but I feel that Mongolians have very sustainable connections with many of the neighbors in the regions, include China, Russia, Japan, even North Korea. I think that is important. That Mongolia have the potential to become the channel that's besides Japan, to be another frontier countries which can help United States to negotiate with its neighbors. Given that the Mongolia's diplomatic relations with most of the countries in the region are very constructive. I think that will be very helpful for the the U.S. national interest and the U.S.'s attempt to rebalance into the region. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So moving on to Nomin, what do you think will be the most useful tool in reducing hate crimes against Asians and Asian Americans in the U.S.?
Thank you. That's a good question. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. have a regulation in place, but the U.S. administration, if point on if improve the implementation of these regulations, it would be more efficient to combating this issue that happening in U.S. right now.
Yeah, better regulation is a dream goal, and I wish it was easier to achieve.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, so to William, so do you think that the Biden administration wants to reduce tension against China? So do you think that they would be willing to kind of improve and increase educational programs, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a great question. I mean, I think it's quite obvious that, of course, the Biden administration does want to reduce tensions with China. Reduction of tensions, in any case, is a good thing. But what I actually am sort of seeing here, though, is that I think the meetings between Secretary of State Blinken and his Chinese counterparts in Anchorage really helped set the tone. I think the way the U.S. is kind of viewing this right now is that they are a little bit more clear-eyed than they were in the past about the nature of the U.S.-China relationship. The U.S. understands it as a competitive relationship and a rivalry. So the U.S. and the Biden administration, I think, is not exactly in any hurry to show that it has, undertaken a whole raft of measures that will improve relations with China and improve connections with China on these issues, because, just for domestic political reasons and sort of the mood of the times, I suppose you could say, I think the last thing the Biden administration would want to have on its plate is a bunch of headlines saying that the first thing the Biden administration does is that it's improved its ties with China in all these areas without having first done things to challenge China. So I honestly think that the administration, does want to undertake these easy to do restoration of cultural and economic ties, but they're probably going to wait to do it until after they have something to show for to the American people that they were tough on China first. To begin with, I think it's definitely a mixture of domestic politics at play, as well as a matter of priorities. Before they handle, big issue priorities, I don't think they're going to use these little trust building exercises just yet. I think they're going to hold it in their arsenal until there's a good moment to deploy them, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's a great response. Thank you for staying after. I know it's late or early, I guess, or not as early anymore in Mongolia. And I know it's very late for our US participants. So yeah, I'd like to thank you all for staying and kind of participating. And yeah, I'm really proud of all of you. And I think you guys all did a great job. So thank you so much for being willing to do this. Yeah, and have a good night or a good day if it's Monday for you. Yeah. So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica, for organizing it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully we'll
Yeah.
meet in person someday.
Yes.
Yes.
Mongolia.
That's a dream. You did it. Okay. So, bye.
Okay.